All right. Well, Paul, welcome to Drunk Comics.
I am so happy to be here, coming live from the Nerd Cave on my Sunday evening. I am on my third drink, so this ought to make a good night.
This is a good thing. All right. So, would you like to tell me a little about yourself and where your Nerd Cave is located?
My Nerd Cave is located here in Bean Creek neighborhood of Indianapolis, Indiana, where I work as a writer, writing mostly about plumbing things and HVAC repairs to your home. And when I'm not doing that, I do extremely nerd things like build lots of toys around my room. And I've been a comic book reader since I was 6 years old. My first exposure to comics was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends in 1981 when Stan Lee was narrating. And I learned A, who Spider-Man was, and B, that a man named Stan Lee was involved in him. And it's just been uphill ever since.
That is a very good start. Also appropriate given my class.
Yes, I know. Miss Spider-Man. I will tell you what I told you. I'll repeat for the world what I told you earlier. With great power must also come great responsibility is the most important line in American literature in the last 100 years. I mean that without irony or sarcasm. I would dare say it is the Call Me Ishmael for our time. Except it teaches a better lesson than Call Me Ishmael. It's the center of all comic book ethos. And establishing.
And also, it's a really good lesson, and how culturally pervasive is it?
It's been quoted in Supreme Court opinions now. That's how much bigger do you get than that? Unsurprisingly, by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, may her soul and memory be a blessing to us all.
Yes. Well said. All right. On a happier note, what are you here to talk about today?
I am here to talk about the strange, varied, extremely tangled, and extremely entertaining history of Stephen Ross Gerber and Howard the Duck.
Yes. Let's get weird.
Let's get weird. Well, you can't not get weird with Steve Gerber. If you don't mind, I will begin, and we'll see what happens. Steve Gerber is, if you're my age, 45 years old, Gen X, Steve Gerber is probably the architect of part of your childhood. In addition to being a major Marvel writer of the 70s, obviously, he was the story editor on G.I. Joe. He was a story editor on Transformers. He was the co-creator of Thundarr the Barbarian, with Jack Kirby, by the way, and the co-creator of the Dungeons and Dragons TV show, the cartoon where, kids, roller coaster, etc., etc. A very weird show that we all loved dearly. Gerber was all over the place, So, but we'll bring our story back about 15 years before that to the around 1970, when Steve Gerber was part of that second generation of writers to come into Marvel after Stan and Larry Lieber and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko had sort of established the thing. Around 1970, a bunch of new blood came around. You get Roy Thomas, who basically became editor-in-chief after Stan. You get Jim Starlin, who went through decades of obscurity and is now the most important comic creator of all of our modern era, simply for having created Thanos. And then you have Steve Gerber. And all these people came to Marvel from various parts of the nation wanting to work. They were very dedicated. They had lots of ideas that they absolutely had to get out of their systems, which is why Starlin's very first comic was a comic about this idea he had based on the Greek ideas of Thanatos and Eros, and they're still with us today. Gerber was a very strange individual. I've spent decades trying to understand him. I would not claim I have a PhD in Gerberology. There are those who know much more about Gerber than I do, but I would say I have a pretty good understanding, and I don't understand Steve Gerber. Let's
just interject here with the 70s and workplaces the way they were. There were probably some drugs involved. I'm just gonna say it.
I wish in retrospect I had asked Steve about that, because he was very active online in the 1990s. He was one of the very first comic book creators to be online, and so I talked to him. I can't remember if it was AOL or CompuServe, but one of the two big 90s things he had
back when the internet came in a disc, kids.
Yeah. And
anyone who's young enough to not remember, the internet used to come in like a CD.
A CD that we used as coasters because we had so damn many of them because AOL would send them to us. But back in the early 90s, the only two real comic book creators who were online in a big way were Steve Gerber and Peter David. And I was chatting with them a lot on their forums because there weren't that many fans on their forums because it's 1994 and the only people who have internet are college students and huge nerds. I am both, so there you go. And so Gerber, you know, I was
to be a huge nerd from the beginning. You're like the hipster of nerds because now it's cool to be a nerd.
If I begin to talk as if I know Steve Gerber, I need to give the caveat. I do not know Steve Gerber, but we exchanged numerous emails that I wish I still had because they were 10 email addresses ago. You know, and I didn't talk to him too much after around 2000. So, but I've read enough about him that I start talking like I know him. So just understand that's my context.
Okay. So, fair warning. Yeah. Fair disclaimer.
Yeah. So Steve Gerber, I've talked about his 90s stuff when he came, or 80s stuff rather. When he came into comics in the 70s, he would basically pick up any job that he would get. You know, one of his earliest jobs he got fired from by Stan Lee himself because he and Jim Starlin worked together on an issue of Iron Man that was quite frankly more or less terrible. And both he and Jim would tell you the same thing. And Stan was still editor-in-chief at the time he saw it and said, "Get those guys off Iron Man." They gave Iron Man roller skates, by the way. That was their cardinal sin. They gave Iron Man rocket-powered roller skates. And that was just too far for Stan Lee. For the record, both of them got along great with Stan after that because it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to them. Jim Starlin went from Iron Man to the Captain Marvel book, where he made his name. And Steve went to a number of other books, including Adventure into Fear, where he was the head writer of Man-Thing, which was already a bizarre comic that got weirder under Gerber because Man-Thing resembled Swamp Thing a little bit, and he didn't create Man-Thing, by the way, but it resembled Swamp Thing a little bit in that he was this shambling monster from the swamps who also was a guardian of the nexus of all realities. Because, well, these things happen in comic books. It's Marvel, that's the explanation. And
DC and Marvel like to feed off each other and copy each other.
Yep. And so with the nexus of all realities in Adventure into Fear, starring Man-Thing, Gerber was able to introduce a great many concepts. You had the Wizard, you had the Wizard's Apprentice, you had this Conan-type guy called Korek, I believe. And they were on this dimension-spanning adventure. And because Steve Gerber is an intensely weird individual, he just decided to start throwing in random elements. And one of the first most random elements is a talking duck walks out of the bushes. I believe that's what actually said in the script. I don't remember if it was him or Val Mayer, the artist who came up with it. But a talking duck walks out of the bushes, wearing a fedora and a coat and tie, and smoking a cigar, and generally griping about everything he sees, thus establishing a 50-year precedent for how Howard the Duck will continue for all of us. So Howard is part of this. Steve Gerber does Adventure into Fear for a little while, and everything's great. Howard dies in his second issue because he falls into a vortex to all realities from which there is no escape. And, you know, that's just, once again, Steve was a very random type. That was something that happened. I wish I knew more of the story here, but basically he gets the chance to carry on Howard the Duck into a couple of other strips and then a book about Howard the Duck. So about a year and a half after Howard's first appearance, you have Howard the Duck #1, an ongoing series by Steve Gerber, about his talking duck who does nothing but gripe about everything. Because when he falls into this, he falls into this nexus of reality. This is not. I mean, as pitches for a comic go, it's not quite up there with lasagna eating cat who hates Mondays, but it's up there.
That's
and
fair.
By the way, something that has been lost in recent years, the original Howard the Duck was literally a duck. He was about this tall, and a duck wearing a suit and tie, chomping a cigar and a fedora. For reasons we'll get into in a little bit, he's been more humanized lately. They put him like roughly 5 feet, 4 feet tall, but back then, literal.
I feel like that's worse.
Do what?
I feel like that makes it creepier.
Yeah.
I feel like making him more human makes it creepier.
Yeah. And there's a horrible story about that we'll get to in a few minutes. Depending on how long it takes us. Oh, yeah.
Spoilers!
So many bizarre things about Howard the Duck. That's why I love the chance to do this because if nothing else, I'll be able to inform the world about how very strange things got.
Yes,
I'll make a sidebar about Steve Gerber that sums up everything about Steve Gerber as a writer. Because at the time, many comic fans already know this one, but maybe there'll be people watching this who don't. At the time, Gerber was also writing the Defenders, the Hulk. The Hulk. I forget who the members of the Defenders were, but it was like the secondary superhero book at the time, behind Avengers and X-Men. And he was the writer, and he had very strange things happening. He brought in what was called the Elf with a Gun. And I said Elf with a Gun because it's literally the only name we ever get for the character. He's this elf looking like he's working in Santa's workshop who shows up randomly throughout the Defenders, going into random people's homes and shooting them. And that's it.
This is a villain?
At no point does he ever meet the Defenders. At no point is what he's doing ever explained. You'll see a Defender's adventure, and then there'll be a half page of the Elf with a Gun shows up at somebody's house, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're an elf with a gun." And he's like, "Yes, I am." Boom, and that's it. Gerber says
again. Lots of drugs going around the Marvel office. I don't know.
I never did ask Steve if he'd been doing drugs back then because I do not. I wish I knew because I don't know if was on drugs or if he's just that weird.
That's actually kind of a delightful mystery to ponder over.
Yeah, true enough.
And people are just that weird. I don't know.
So, but the Elf with the Gun was resolved by other writers later on who came up with a halfway decent explanation. There was something about like he was from the future or another dimension, and the people he was killing were people who accidentally caused great damage down the line, etc., etc. I never fully understood it, but Gerber was just like this. The world is random. Sometimes you get hit by a truck, and sometimes an elf with a gun shoots you. And then the elf with a gun got hit by a truck in one of his issues of the Defenders. Never seen again. Not under Steve Gerber. I would take it back. He does show up again under Gerber's pen. We'll get to that. There's a whole lot of we'll get to that going on. So Howard the Duck. First issue of Howard the Duck has Howard the Duck meeting Spider-Man as they're fighting someone called Pro Rata, the mad financial wizard. And also establishing a pattern because Howard the Duck lives in the Marvel Universe. He lives in the worst part of the Marvel Universe, namely Cleveland. But he lives in the Marvel Universe, but does not always interact with the rest of it. But Spider-Man's there, and he meets Spider-Man, and then Spider-Man.
What is Spider-Man doing in Cleveland?
Spider-Man is being sent by J. Jonah Jameson to photograph something or other. I actually don't know if he was in Cleveland for this adventure. He fought Bessie the Hell Cow and the threat of the frog, if that tells you anything. I wish I'm brain farting on who the frog was. If it was the frog man or the frog thing. But he fights an evil frog, and he fights a cow that has been infected by Dracula, a.k.a. the Hell Cow. Once again, that was more or less how that comes. So that was our first issue, and then Howard he meets in the course of the adventure meets a woman named Beverly Switzler, who then becomes his kind of girlfriend. It's always a little weird, and for about 30 issues of very
human woman.
Say what? Yeah,
Howard the Duck has a human girlfriend.
It was all the movie. The movie was questionable and all this too, but yes, he is at the very least romantically intrigued with her. He's always a little vague on the exact mechanics of it. Thank God these are PG-rated comics. At the very least, they were traveling partners at all times. And Nick and Charlie.
Okay, so we can thank the comics code for that. Small mercy.
Yes, we can.
The comics code is horrible otherwise. I'm sorry, but
no, I agree wholeheartedly. So,
that's a whole other issue. A whole other episode.
What follows are 30 issues of some truly insane social commentary that every so often interacts with the Marvel Universe, but mostly is just Howard the Duck running into weird things that are close to the real world, but extremely satirical. And this is, I'm trying to phrase this important because it's like the most important thing I have to say in this whole segment. Howard the Duck was not really a superhero comic. It was not even a funny animal comic. It was Steve Gerber's blog. It was him writing about whatever was going on in the world that he thought was interesting, and he used Howard the Duck as his Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to interact with this interesting thing and comment upon the action, and then generally gripe about it to no end because griping about everything in that was Howard the Duck's thing.
And Marvel Comics just let him do it.
It sold. It sold really well. It's the 70s. If Gerber wasn't on drugs, I'm sure half the readers were. So reading that run of issues, it's amazing how little it actually exists in the Marvel universe because it's just what weird stuff is going on. Howard wanders into a branch of Sufism, who are obsessed with house cleaning, and they all have big happy faces. He spends 2 issues talking about just his thoughts on sort of the whole modern day cult movement that was going on in the 70s, and make fun of it relentlessly so by members of Sufism, but which is SOOFI, which is Steve Gerber's idea of comedy. The members of the cleaning up stuff Sufism throwing Howard the Duck into the washing machine of death. One of the photos I've sent you, this would be an excellent time to pop up, is a picture of all the members of Sufi with their big happy faces and their mops threatening Howard. And whenever Howard did wander into the parts of the Marvel universe, Steve was generally making fun of something in the real world. Howard spent an issue becoming the master of quack fu, learning ancient secrets of duck martial arts, in a way that was similar to Shang-Chi, the master of kung fu in the comics, but also was a way of making fun of the fact that martial arts were becoming a really trendy thing in the 70s in a way that wasn't always particularly related to actual martial arts. Yeah. Steve Gerber wasn't a martial artist, but he could smell bullshit when he saw it. And he was pretty sure most of the people selling ninjutsu, classes out of the back of comic books were probably full of it. And that's
funny thing that lasted through to like the 90s.
Yep. Oh yeah. I remember. Oh, was it Count Dante, the man with hands so dangerous they were registered as deadly weapons? He had ads all through the 70s, and was a big influence on the Karate Kid because the character of Kreese was at least partially based on him, I think. A lot of weird stuff going on.
He was kung fu fighting.
I find many older decades, just naming the decade explains everything. If you say it was the 70s, there you go. It was the 70s. Nothing else can explain it.
Yep.
So Howard the Duck once again wanders in and out of these things, and Gerber, Howard. I've spent years trying to figure out what Howard is to Gerber. He's not his alter ego. He's not his id. But he's a voice in his brain that's always yelling at him. I think Howard is his counterpart to understand the world, his mirror reflection in a way that was not always healthy in his own mind. Once again, I'll get to that in about 20 minutes. But yes, I say that.
Spoiler.
I say it in a way it sounds like I'm actually organized here, and I'm just going through it in chronological order. Anyway.
Drunk comics. There's no organization.
Yeah. I'm almost done with my 3rd drink now, so I'm really going on it. So, anyway, one of the other photos this will be a good time to pop up is Howard the Duck number 8, in which Howard the Duck runs for president. And this is 1976, and Marvel made a big deal of it. I have a Howard the Duck pin from that era that is one of my most prized possessions, and I can't find it. Because we just moved and everything's in boxes and Lord only knows where it is. But there were these pins that said "Get Down America," get down, duck. Very clever. Howard the Duck for president, and they even have this Howard the Duck presidential kit. This press kit that you could mail away to Marvel and they would give you, which included pictures of Howard, shaking hands and a letter from Steve Gerber apologizing for the whole thing. Now that is a neat piece of nerd ephemera I want to get my hands on someday. It shows up on eBay at $300, so I have not gotten it yet. That's one of my lottery winner, things down the road because I'm not ready. I want that so bad.
We'll drop the GoFundMe in the comments.
I will. I will be satisfied with my pin, which was being sold for like 50 cents at comic shops all over the nation. Because once again, Marvel made a big deal of the whole Howard the Duck thing because. I'm not really sure why. Once again, I guess it sold really well. But Howard the Duck for president was one of the iconic issues.
Is Howard running this year? Because I would vote for him.
I would have voted for him in 1976 too, which is when he was running. it was coinciding with the Ford Carter election. But
Oh,
on General
yeah.
Principle, I would have voted for him. But it was a surprisingly good issue that talks about things like campaign finance and who you have to sell out to become president. And Howard the Duck is many things, but he's not a sellout, which is among the reasons he doesn't become president. Also, there's a sex scandal.
Of course there is.
But I mean, Gerber.
When you're going into you're going to buy a comic, you want to read about campaign finance and sex scandals with a duck. Why not?
I don't know if Steve Gerber thought that's what people wanted to read, but it's what he wrote. And once again, it's sold. Howard the Duck for president. Many people still remember it today, 44 years later. I'm sitting here talking about it. I was in diapers at the time. But once again, Marvel put a big marketing push behind this thing. It was probably the peak. I don't know if you could call it Howard Mania. I wasn't there for it, but there was an awful lot of Howard the Duck stuff going on at that time.
That's craziness. That's
I know people who know their stuff are gonna be looking at this eventually. Stephen Grant is my Facebook friend, and he wrote Howard for a little bit after Gerber left. So if you see this, Stephen, by all means, correct me and tell me where I've screwed it up. I promise I won't take it personally. So.
Yep. This is where I say the drunk rule. You're allowed to correct. You're not allowed to be a dick about it because we're drunk. We're having fun.
Thank you.